The Marine veteran was refused entry on a plane with his service dog. But when he spoke up, Marcus Johnson had always been a fighter. Growing up in a small town in rural Montana, he learned early on that life wasn't always fair. But with determination and grit, you could overcome just about anything. It was this mindset that led him to join the United States Marine Corps right out of high school, eager to serve his country and make a difference in the world. During his 10 years of service, Marcus saw more than his fair share of combat. He completed 3 tours in Afghanistan, earning multiple commendations for his bravery and leadership. But the horrors of war left their mark on the young Marine. The constant threat of IEDs, the loss of fellow soldiers, and the weight of split-second decisions that meant life or death for civilians and combatants alike took their toll on Marcus's psyche. When he was finally discharged in 2018, Marcus returned home, a changed man. The nightmares and flashbacks were relentless. Simple tasks like going to the grocery store or attending a family barbecue became overwhelming ordeals. He was diagnosed with severe PTSD and struggled to readjust to civilian life. It was during this dark period that Marcus met Apollo, a golden retriever trained as a service dog for veterans with PTSD. From the moment they were paired, Marcus felt a connection he hadn't experienced since his days in the Corps. Apollo became his constant companion, trained to recognize the signs of an oncoming panic attack and provide comfort and grounding when Marcus's mind threatened to spiral out of control. With Apollo by his side, Marcus slowly began to reclaim his life. He started volunteering at the local VA hospital, sharing his experiences with other veterans, and helping them navigate the challenges of life after service. He even began dating again, cautiously opening his heart to Sarah, a kind-hearted teacher he met at a support group for families of veterans. As Marcus approached his 30th birthday, he decided it was time to face one of his biggest fears head-on: flying. He hadn't been on a plane since returning from his last tour. The thought of being trapped in a metal tube thousands of feet in the air sending his anxiety through the roof. But with Apollo's calming presence and Sarah's unwavering support, Marcus felt ready to take this crucial step in his recovery. Little did he know that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would not only challenge his progress, but also shine a spotlight on the ongoing struggles faced by veterans with invisible wounds. The day of the flight arrived, and Marcus stood in line at the check-in counter, his palms sweaty as he gripped Apollo's leash. Sarah stood beside him, offering quiet words of encouragement. They were headed to San Diego for a week-long vacation, a trip that Marcus had been both excited and terrified about for months. As they approached the counter, Marcus took deep breaths, focusing on the steady pressure of Apollo leaning against his leg. The service dog, sensing his handler's anxiety, looked up at Marcus with warm brown eyes, as if to say, "I've got you." The check-in process went smoothly at first. The airline representative, a middle-aged woman named Karen, smiled as she processed their tickets and checked their luggage. However, her demeanor changed when she noticed Apollo. "Sir, is that a service animal?" Karen asked, her tone suddenly curt. Marcus nodded, reaching into his pocket for Apollo's documentation. "Yes, he's my service dog. I have all his paperwork here." Karen's eyes narrowed as she scrutinized the papers. "I'm sorry, but I don't see any specific medical condition listed here. What exactly is the dog for?" Marcus felt his chest tighten. He knew he wasn't legally required to disclose his medical information, but he also didn't want to cause a scene. "He's for PTSD," Marcus said quietly, hoping that would be the end of it. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Karen's expression hardened. "PTSD isn't a real disability," she said dismissively. "I'm going to need to speak with my supervisor about this." Sarah stepped forward, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Excuse me, but that's completely inappropriate. PTSD is absolutely a recognized disability, and service dogs for PTSD are protected under the ADA." As Karen walked away to consult her supervisor, Marcus felt the familiar tendrils of panic creeping in. The noise of the busy airport seemed to amplify, the fluorescent lights suddenly too bright. Apollo, sensing the change in Marcus's demeanor, pressed closer to him, providing tactile stimulation to help ground him. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours to Marcus as he struggled to keep his breathing under control. Finally, Karen returned with her supervisor, a stern-looking man in his 50s. "I'm sorry, sir," the supervisor said, not sounding sorry at all. "But we have concerns about allowing your dog on the flight. We can't verify that he's a legitimate service animal, and we have to consider the comfort of our other passengers." Marcus felt like the ground was dropping out from under him. But I have all the required documentation," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Apollo is trained to perform specific tasks related to my disability. He's not just a pet." The supervisor shook his head. "Our policy is clear. Without proper verification of a specific medical need, we can't allow the animal on board. You're welcome to fly without him, or we can rebook you on a later flight if you'd like to make other arrangements for the dog." Sarah's voice cut through the fog of Marcus's rising panic. "This is discrimination. You can't do this. We'll file a complaint with the Department of Transportation." As the argument escalated, drawing the attention of nearby passengers, Marcus felt himself slipping further into a dissociative state. The voices around him became muffled, and his vision started to tunnel. Apollo, trained for exactly this scenario, began to paw at Marcus's leg and whine softly, trying to bring his focus back to the present. But the damage was done. The combination of the confrontation, the crowded airport, and the prospect of being separated from Apollo pushed Marcus over the edge. His breathing became rapid and shallow, and he swayed on his feet. "Marcus?" Sarah's concerned voice sounded far away. "Marcus, can you hear me?" Before anyone could react, Marcus's legs gave out, and he collapsed to the floor. Apollo immediately positioned himself over Marcus's chest, a task he was trained to perform during panic attacks to provide deep pressure stimulation. The commotion drew a crowd, with onlookers murmuring in confusion and concern. As Sarah knelt beside Marcus, trying to help him through the panic attack, she looked up at the stunned airline staff with tears of frustration in her eyes. "Are you happy now?" she demanded. "This is exactly why he needs Apollo. This is what PTSD looks like. This is what you've done." As Marcus lay on the cold tile floor of the airport, struggling to regain control of his breathing with Apollo's comforting weight on his chest, a surprising voice cut through the chaos. "What's going on here?" The authoritative tone belonged to a tall, distinguished-looking man in his 60s, wearing a crisp suit with airline executive pins on the lapel. The supervisor straightened up immediately, recognizing the newcomer. "Mr. Daniels, sir. We were just dealing with a situation involving an unverified service animal." Mr. Daniels, who turned out to be the airline's regional director, surveyed the scene with a frown. His eyes lingered on Marcus, still on the ground with Apollo, and then moved to Sarah, who was kneeling beside them with tears streaking her face. "Explain," Mr. Daniels demanded, his voice low and controlled. As the supervisor stammered through his explanation, emphasizing their concerns about fake service animals, Mr. Daniels's expression grew increasingly troubled. When the supervisor finished, Mr. Daniels held up a hand to silence him. "I served 2 tours in Vietnam," Mr. Daniels said, his voice carrying clearly through the now hushed terminal. "I've seen what war can do to a person's mind. I've lived it." He knelt down beside Marcus, who was finally starting to come out of his panic attack, thanks to Apollo's steady presence and Sarah's gentle encouragement. "Son," Mr. Daniels said softly, "I'm sorry for what you've been through today, both in service and here. Can you tell me your name?" Marcus, still shaky but more aware, managed to respond. "Marcus Johnson, sir. United States Marine Corps." Mr. Daniels nodded, a look of understanding passing between the two veterans. He then stood, turning to address not just the airline staff, but the gathered crowd as well. "Listen up, everyone. What we have here is a failure to understand, a failure to show compassion, and a failure to uphold the very values our company claims to represent." He paused, making eye contact with various onlookers. "This man, Marcus Johnson, served our country. He carries wounds that we can't see, but that doesn't make them any less real. His service dog is not a pet or a comfort animal. It is a highly trained medical device, as vital to him as a wheelchair is to someone who can't walk." Mr. Daniels then turned to the supervisor and Karen. "As of this moment, you are both suspended pending a full review of this incident. We will be implementing mandatory sensitivity training for all staff with a focus on invisible disabilities and the rights of service animal handlers." The revelation of Mr. Daniels's own veteran status and his swift action sent shockwaves through the crowd. Murmurs of approval and nods of agreement rippled through the onlookers. Several people stepped forward, offering words of support to Marcus and condemning the airline's initial response. As Marcus slowly got to his feet, still leaning on Apollo for support, Mr. Daniels addressed him directly. "Mr. Johnson, on behalf of the airline, I offer our sincerest apologies. Your tickets have been upgraded to first class, and we will make sure you and Apollo are accommodated with the respect and dignity you deserve." This unexpected turn of events left Marcus, Sarah, and the crowd stunned. What had started as a discriminatory incident had transformed into a powerful moment of education, compassion, and change, all thanks to the intervention of someone who truly understood the invisible scars of war. As the initial shock of the incident began to wear off, Marcus found himself at a crossroads. The airline's regional director, Mr. Daniels, had offered a generous solution to make amends for the discrimination Marcus had faced. First-class tickets and a personal guarantee of accommodation for both him and Apollo seemed like more than he could have hoped for after such a harrowing experience. Yet, as Marcus stood there, still slightly unsteady on his feet, with Apollo pressed reassuringly against his leg, he felt a surge of something he hadn't experienced in a long time: purpose. The crowd that had gathered during the confrontation was still present, many of them wearing expressions of sympathy, outrage, and curiosity. Marcus realized that this moment presented an opportunity, not just for him, but for countless other veterans and individuals with invisible disabilities who faced similar discrimination every day. Taking a deep breath, Marcus turned to Mr. Daniels. "Sir, I appreciate your offer, and I'm grateful for your understanding, but I can't in good conscience accept it and just move on as if nothing happened." Sarah looked at him with a mix of concern and pride, squeezing his hand in support as he continued. "What happened here today isn't an isolated incident. It's something that veterans and others with PTSD and invisible disabilities face all the time. If I just take the upgrade and go on my way, nothing really changes. The staff here might get some training, but what about all the other airports, airlines, and public spaces where this keeps happening?" Marcus paused, looking around at the attentive faces in the crowd. I think I need to stay here and talk about this. To anyone who's willing to listen, maybe if people understand more about PTSD and service dogs, we can prevent this from happening to someone else." Mr. Daniels nodded slowly, a look of respect dawning on his face. "That's a bold decision, Mr. Johnson. What did you have in mind?" "I'd like to hold an impromptu awareness session right here in the terminal if that's possible. Share my story, explain what Apollo does for me, answer questions. And I'd like to challenge your airline to do more than just offer sensitivity training. Work with veteran organizations to develop comprehensive policies and procedures for accommodating service animals and their handlers." The consequences of Marcus's decision were immediate and far-reaching. Mr. Daniels, impressed by Marcus's courage and vision, not only agreed to the impromptu session, but also promised to personally oversee the development of new company-wide policies regarding service animals. Word spread quickly through the airport. As Marcus, with Apollo faithfully by his side, began to share his story, more and more people gathered to listen. He talked about his experiences in Afghanistan, the challenges of living with PTSD, and the life-changing impact Apollo had made. Sarah stood nearby, occasionally adding her perspective as a loved one supporting a veteran with PTSD. As Marcus spoke, something remarkable began to happen. Other veterans in the airport, some who had been silently struggling with their own invisible wounds, stepped forward to share their stories. A young woman with a seizure-alert dog joined the group, explaining how her service animal had given her the freedom to live independently. The impromptu gathering turned into a powerful educational moment. Airport staff, passengers, and even a few pilots on their way to flights stopped to listen and learn. People asked questions, gaining a deeper understanding of the challenges faced by those with invisible disabilities and the crucial role that service animals play in their lives. However, Marcus's decision was not without its challenges. His anxiety, already heightened from the earlier confrontation, threatened to overwhelm him at times as he spoke to the growing crowd. There were moments when he had to pause, relying on Apollo's calming presence and Sarah's steady support to ground himself before continuing. Additionally, Marcus and Sarah missed their original flight to San Diego. While the airline was more than willing to rebook them, it meant rearranging their carefully planned vacation itinerary. Yet, as the hours passed and the impact of their impromptu awareness session became clear, both Marcus and Sarah felt that the sacrifice was worth it. By the end of the day, Marcus was exhausted but filled with a sense of accomplishment he hadn't felt since his days in the Marines. He had turned a traumatic experience into an opportunity for education and change. The airline, spurred by the positive response to Marcus's session, announced plans to partner with veteran organizations to create comprehensive training programs and policies for accommodating service animals. As Marcus, Sarah, and Apollo finally boarded their rescheduled flight, upgraded to first class, as Mr. Daniels had promised, they knew that their vacation had taken on a new meaning. What had started as a personal challenge for Marcus to overcome his fear of flying had become the catalyst for a much larger movement of awareness and acceptance. Little did Marcus know that this was just the beginning of a journey that would take him far beyond the confines of that airport terminal, challenging him to become a voice for those who had long been silenced or overlooked. As Marcus and Sarah settled into their first-class seats, with Apollo comfortably situated at Marcus's feet, they were unaware that their story was already spreading far beyond the confines of the airport. Unbeknownst to them, several passengers who had witnessed the incident and subsequent awareness session had shared their experiences on social media, complete with photos and videos of Marcus speaking to the crowd. By the time their plane touched down in San Diego, the posts had gone viral. Service Dog Hero and Invisible Wounds were trending on Twitter, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of discrimination and calling for better understanding of PTSD and service animals. Among those who came across the story was Congressman David Roth, a veteran himself and a staunch advocate for military personnel and veterans' rights. Moved by Marcus's experience and impressed by his handling of the situation, Congressman Roth decided to reach out. Meanwhile, as Marcus and Sarah tried to enjoy their vacation, they found themselves constantly distracted by the buzzing of their phones. Friends, family, and even strangers were reaching out to offer support and share the viral posts. Local news stations in San Diego caught wind of their presence and began requesting interviews. Initially overwhelmed by the attention, Marcus was hesitant to engage further. He had come to San Diego to relax and face his fears, not to become the center of a media storm. However, Sarah gently encouraged him to see the opportunity in this unexpected turn of events. "Think about it, Marcus," she said as they walked along the beach, Apollo trotting happily beside them. "You've already made such an impact. Imagine how many more people you could help if you shared your story more widely." As Marcus mulled over Sarah's words, he received a call from an unknown number. It was Congressman Roth's office, inviting Marcus to testify at an upcoming congressional hearing on improving services for veterans with PTSD. This invitation presented Marcus with another crucial decision. Testifying before Congress would mean cutting their vacation short and thrusting himself into the public eye in a way he had never anticipated. It would be a chance to advocate for real change, but it also meant facing his anxiety on an even larger stage. As Marcus grappled with this decision, another subplot began to unfold back at the airport where their journey had begun. The video of Mr. Daniels intervening and supporting Marcus had caught the attention of the airline's corporate headquarters. The company's CEO, initially concerned about potential negative publicity, saw an opportunity to turn this incident into a catalyst for industry-wide change. The airline announced a comprehensive review of its policies regarding service animals and passengers with invisible disabilities. They reached out to several veteran organizations and disability rights groups, seeking input on how to improve their practices and training programs. This move sparked a conversation within the airline industry as a whole. Other major carriers, not wanting to be left behind, began to reevaluate their own policies. The incident that had started with one discriminatory act was now pushing an entire industry towards greater inclusivity and understanding. Back in San Diego, Marcus and Sarah's vacation took on a new dimension. As they visited popular tourist spots, they found themselves engaging in impromptu discussions with people who recognized Marcus from the viral videos. Apollo, ever the professional, adapted seamlessly to the increased attention, remaining focused on Marcus's needs, while inadvertently becoming a furry ambassador for service dogs everywhere. These interactions, while sometimes overwhelming for Marcus, also helped him see the broader impact of sharing his story. He heard from other veterans who felt seen and understood for the first time, from family members of those struggling with PTSD who gained new insights, and from ordinary citizens who admitted their perspectives had been changed. As the week progressed, Marcus found himself not just facing his fear of flying, but also gradually becoming more comfortable with public speaking and advocacy. Each conversation, each shared story, seemed to chip away at the isolation he had felt since returning from Afghanistan. Sarah watched this transformation with a mixture of pride and concern. She was thrilled to see Marcus finding a new purpose, but she also worried about the toll this unexpected spotlight might take on his mental health. She made it her mission to ensure he had moments of quiet and relaxation amidst the growing demands for his time and attention. As their vacation neared its end, Marcus and Sarah sat on the beach, watching the sunset with Apollo lounging nearby. The decision about the congressional hearing loomed large in their minds. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you," Sarah said, squeezing Marcus's hand. "But remember, you don't have to carry the weight of every veteran's struggle on your shoulders. It's okay to take care of yourself too." Marcus nodded, grateful for her support and wisdom. As he watched Apollo play in the surf, he realized that this journey had already taken him further than he ever imagined. Whether he chose to testify before Congress or not, he knew that his voice, and the voices of countless others like him, had already started to make a difference. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. As darkness fell, Marcus felt a sense of peace settle over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he wouldn't face them alone. The whirlwind of events since their airport incident had brought Marcus and Sarah closer than ever, but it had also introduced new dynamics into their relationship. As they navigated the unexpected attention and Marcus's evolving role as an advocate, they found themselves having to redefine the boundaries of their partnership. Sarah had always been Marcus's rock, a steady presence in his life since they met at the support group. She had learned to recognize the signs of his anxiety, to provide space when he needed it, and to offer comfort without smothering him. Now, as Marcus stepped into the spotlight, Sarah found herself taking on new roles. Part publicist, part bodyguard, always advocate. One evening, as they strolled along the San Diego harbor with Apollo, Sarah broached a subject that had been on her mind. "Marcus," she began carefully, "I'm so proud of everything you're doing. But I want to make sure you're taking care of yourself in all of this. Are you sure you're ready for the kind of attention testifying before Congress would bring?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his hand absently stroking Apollo's head. "Honestly, I'm terrified," he admitted. "But I also feel like I have a responsibility, not just to other vets, but to Apollo, to you, to myself. For so long, I've been defined by what I couldn't do because of my PTSD. Maybe this is my chance to redefine myself by what I can do to help others." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "I get that, and I'll support you no matter what. I just want to make sure we're in this together. Your battles are my battles, remember?" Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. "Sarah, I couldn't do any of this without you. You've been my strength through all of this. But are you sure you're okay with all of this? Our lives are going to change if I do this. Your life will change." Sarah's eyes welled with tears, but she smiled. "Marcus Johnson, don't you dare try to protect me from this. We're a team, you, me, and Apollo. Whatever comes, we face it together." Their embrace was interrupted by Apollo's soft whine. He had sensed the emotional tension and was performing his trained response, gently nudging Marcus's leg to ground him. They both laughed, the moment of heaviness broken. "See," Sarah said, wiping her eyes, "we've got our own furry chaperone to keep us in line." As they continued their walk, they delved deeper into what these changes might mean for their future. They discussed the potential impact on Sarah's teaching career if Marcus's advocacy work required more travel. They talked about the challenges of maintaining privacy in the face of growing public interest in their story. And they addressed the elephant in the room, how this newfound purpose might affect Marcus's ongoing battle with PTSD. "I won't lie," Marcus said, "part of me is worried that the stress of all this will set me back. But another part of me feels more alive than I have in years. Like I'm finally moving forward instead of just trying not to slip backwards." Sarah squeezed his hand. "And that's why we'll take it one day at a time. We'll check in with each other, be honest about how we're feeling, and if either of us needs to step back, we do it. No questions asked." As they talked, both Marcus and Sarah realized that this experience was pushing them to communicate more openly than ever before. The challenges they were facing were bringing to light aspects of their relationship that had gone unexamined in the comfortable routine they had established. By the time they returned to their hotel, they had hashed out a plan. They would approach this new chapter of their lives as equal partners. Sarah would take an active role in helping to manage the growing demands on Marcus's time, using her organizational skills to keep him from becoming overwhelmed. In return, Marcus promised to be more vocal about his needs and to make sure their relationship remained a priority amidst the chaos. As they got ready for bed, with Apollo settling into his usual spot near Marcus, there was a new energy between them. The uncertainty of the future was still there, but it was overshadowed by a sense of excitement and purpose. They were no longer just a couple dealing with the aftermath of trauma. They were a team poised to make a real difference in the world. Marcus pulled Sarah close, feeling a depth of love and gratitude that almost overwhelmed him. "Thank you," he whispered, "for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Sarah's response was a soft kiss and a whispered, "Always." As they drifted off to sleep, both Marcus and Sarah felt a sense of anticipation for what lay ahead. Whatever challenges they might face, they would face them together, with Apollo by their side, a symbol of resilience and unwavering support. The day of the congressional hearing arrived with a mix of nervous energy and determined resolve. Marcus, Sarah, and Apollo made their way through the bustling halls of the Capitol, surrounded by a whirlwind of activity. Aides rushed past with stacks of papers, other witnesses for the day's proceedings huddled in corners for last-minute preparations, and the ever-present click of cameras served as a constant reminder of the public nature of this moment. As they approached the hearing room, Marcus felt his anxiety begin to spike. The magnitude of what he was about to do, testifying before Congress, sharing his story on a national stage, suddenly felt overwhelming. His breath quickened, and he could feel the onset of a panic attack looming. Sensing the change in Marcus's demeanor, Apollo immediately went into action, pressing his body against Marcus's leg and looking up at him with steady, calming eyes. Sarah, attuned to the subtle signs of Marcus's distress, gently guided them to a quiet alcove away from the main thoroughfare. "Breathe with me, Marcus," she said softly, demonstrating the deep breathing techniques they had practiced countless times. "You've got this. Remember why we're here." As Marcus focused on his breathing, with Apollo providing grounding pressure and Sarah's steady presence beside him, he gradually felt the panic recede. Just then, Congressman Roth approached, his face etched with concern. "Mr. Johnson," he said, "are you all right? We can postpone your testimony if you need more time." Marcus took one final deep breath and straightened up, his hand resting on Apollo's head. "No, sir," he replied with newfound resolve. "I'm ready. This is too important to postpone." As they entered the hearing room, Marcus was struck by the gravity of the setting. The members of the congressional committee sat elevated at the front of the room, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The gallery was packed with spectators, including many veterans and service dog handlers who had come to show their support. When Marcus was called to testify, he made his way to the witness table with Apollo by his side. As he began to speak, his voice initially wavered but grew stronger with each word. He shared his experiences in Afghanistan, the challenges of living with PTSD, and the life-changing impact of having Apollo as his service dog. But it was when Marcus recounted the discrimination he faced at the airport that the room truly fell silent. He spoke not just of his own experience, but of the countless others who had reached out to him with similar stories since his went viral. He highlighted the gaps in current legislation and the need for better education and enforcement of existing laws protecting those with invisible disabilities. As Marcus spoke, Apollo remained a calm, steady presence at his feet. At one point, when Marcus's emotions threatened to overwhelm him, as he described a particularly harrowing moment from his service, Apollo gently placed his paw on Marcus's foot, a silent reminder that he was safe, that he was not alone. The impact of Marcus's testimony was palpable. Committee members who had started the hearing looking distracted or skeptical were now leaning forward, fully engaged. When Marcus finished speaking, there was a moment of profound silence before the room erupted in applause, a rare occurrence in such proceedings. As the questions from the committee began, it became clear that Marcus's words had struck a chord. The discussion shifted from bureaucratic technicalities to genuine inquiry about how to better serve veterans and others with invisible disabilities. Marcus, bolstered by Apollo's presence and Sarah's encouraging nods from the gallery, answered each question with honesty and conviction. What had started as a personal challenge for Marcus had become a pivotal moment in the fight for understanding and accommodation of invisible disabilities. As the hearing concluded, Marcus realized that this was more than just a climactic event in his own journey. It was the beginning of a much larger movement for change. In the weeks following Marcus's powerful testimony before Congress, the momentum for change seemed unstoppable. The video of his speech went viral, sparking a national conversation about invisible disabilities and the role of service animals. Veterans organizations rallied around the cause, pushing for comprehensive legislation to address the issues Marcus had raised. However, as with any attempt at significant social and legislative change, opposition soon emerged. A coalition of airlines and other businesses expressed concerns about the potential costs and logistical challenges of implementing more stringent accommodations for service animals. They argued that clearer distinctions needed to be made between legitimate service animals and emotional support animals to prevent abuse of the system. Additionally, a small but vocal group of disability rights activists criticized Marcus, arguing that his focus on veterans with PTSD was too narrow and overlooked other invisible disabilities. They feared that any new legislation might inadvertently create a hierarchy of disabilities, with combat-related PTSD receiving preferential treatment. Caught in the middle of this growing controversy, Marcus found himself struggling to navigate the complex world of advocacy and politics. The media attention, which had initially seemed like a blessing, now felt overwhelming. Every word he spoke was scrutinized, and he often found himself second-guessing his actions. Sarah, ever his stalwart supporter, could see the toll it was taking on Marcus. "You don't have to fight every battle yourself," she reminded him gently one evening as they sat on their porch, Apollo dozing at their feet. "Maybe it's time to build a team, to bring in others who can help carry this message forward." Taking Sarah's advice to heart, Marcus reached out to Mr. Daniels, the airline executive who had initially supported him. Together, they organized a summit, bringing together representatives from airlines, disability rights organizations, veterans groups, and lawmakers. The summit, held in Washington, D.C., was a tense affair from the start. As Marcus stood at the podium to deliver the opening address, he could feel the weight of conflicting expectations pressing down on him. Apollo, sensing his anxiety, pressed closer to his side. "I stand before you not as an expert, not as a politician, but as someone who has lived the reality of invisible wounds," Marcus began. "I've experienced both the life-changing support of a service animal and the sting of discrimination, but my story is just one of many." He went on to acknowledge the concerns raised by various groups, from the airlines' worries about costs to the fears of other disability advocates about exclusion. "These are complex issues, and they won't be solved in a day," he admitted. "But they won't be solved at all if we don't come together and listen to each other." Over the next few days, heated debates gave way to productive discussions. Marcus, with Sarah and Apollo by his side, moved from table to table, listening to concerns and sharing his experiences, His openness and willingness to understand all perspectives began to break down barriers. A breakthrough came when Marcus suggested a pilot program, partnering with one major airline to implement comprehensive staff training and streamlined procedures for accommodating service animals. The airline would document the costs and challenges, providing real-world data to inform future legislation. The disability rights activists, initially skeptical of Marcus, were won over by his genuine commitment to inclusivity. He worked with them to ensure that the proposed pilot program and any resulting legislation would cover a broad spectrum of invisible disabilities, not just combat-related PTSD. As the summit drew to a close, a framework for moving forward began to take shape. It wasn't a perfect solution. Compromises had been made on all sides, but it was a start. The proposed pilot program would be accompanied by a public awareness campaign, educating the public about invisible disabilities and the crucial role of service animals. Marcus, exhausted but exhilarated, delivered the closing remarks. As he spoke about the progress made and the work still to be done, he felt a sense of pride and purpose that he hadn't experienced since his days in the Marines. This time, however, the mission was not about combat, but about healing and understanding. As the applause faded and people began to file out of the conference room, Marcus knelt down to embrace Apollo. "We did it, boy," he whispered, burying his face in the dog's soft fur. "We really did it." Sarah joined them, wrapping her arms around both Marcus and Apollo. "You were amazing," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've started something important here." Mr. Daniels approached, a smile on his face. "Mr. Johnson," he said, extending his hand, "I think we've made some real progress. There's still a long road ahead, but you've given us a map to follow." As they left the conference center, Marcus, Sarah, and Apollo were met by a group of veterans and service dog handlers who had been following the summit's progress. They cheered as Marcus emerged, many reaching out to shake his hand or pat Apollo. One young woman, her own service dog at her side, approached Marcus with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "For the first time, I feel like someone is really fighting for us." Marcus, overwhelmed by the moment, could only nod. As they made their way through the crowd, with Apollo calmly guiding their path, Marcus realized that this attempt at conflict resolution had become something much larger. It wasn't just about airlines or service dogs anymore. It was about giving voice to those who had long been silenced, about building bridges of understanding in a world too often divided. As they drove home that evening, Marcus sat quietly in the passenger seat, Apollo's head resting on his lap. Sarah glanced over, noticing the pensive look on his face. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked. Marcus smiled, his hand absently stroking Apollo's fur. "I was just thinking, when I came home from Afghanistan, I felt lost, like I didn't have a purpose anymore. But now, it's like I've found a new mission, one that might actually make a difference." Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand. "You already have made a difference, Marcus, to so many people, and to me." As they drove home in comfortable silence, both Marcus and Sarah knew that while they had made significant progress, the journey was far from over. The pilot program would need to be implemented, its results analyzed, and further negotiations would be necessary to turn their framework into concrete legislation. But for the first time in years, Marcus felt truly hopeful about the future. The months following the summit marked a turning point in Marcus's life. As the pilot program with the airline got underway, he found himself thrust into a new role, that of a consultant and educator. He was invited to speak at training sessions for airline staff, sharing his experiences and helping to develop protocols for interacting with passengers who have invisible disabilities. This new direction came with its own set of challenges. The frequent travel and public speaking engagements pushed Marcus out of his comfort zone, forcing him to confront his anxiety on an almost daily basis. There were times when the pressure felt overwhelming, and he considered stepping back from his advocacy work. It was during one such moment of doubt that Marcus received a call from the young woman he had met after the summit. She had been denied entry to a restaurant because of her service dog, and she didn't know what to do. As Marcus talked her through her rights and offered words of encouragement, he realized something important. His struggles were giving others the strength to fight their own battles. This realization became a catalyst for a new phase in Marcus's journey. He decided to establish a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating businesses and the public about invisible disabilities and service animals. The organization, which he named Unseen Allies, would provide resources, training, and legal support to individuals facing discrimination. Sarah, ever supportive, took a sabbatical from her teaching job to help get the organization off the ground. Together, they assembled a team of veterans, disability rights advocates, and legal experts. Apollo, of course, remained by Marcus's side, a living embodiment of the crucial role service animals play. As word of Unseen Allies spread, Marcus found himself at the center of a growing movement. The organization began receiving requests for help and training from across the country. What had started as a personal struggle had evolved into a nationwide effort to bring about lasting change. One evening, as Marcus and Sarah were working late at the Unseen Allies office, Sarah noticed Marcus staring out the window, a pensive look on his face. "What's on your mind?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. Marcus turned to her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. A year ago, I could barely leave the house without having a panic attack. Now look at us." Sarah wrapped her arm around his waist, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You should be proud, Marcus. You've turned your pain into purpose." As they stood there, with Apollo dozing contentedly at their feet, Marcus felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had found not just a new direction for himself, but a way to light the path for others who were still finding their way out of the darkness. As the one-year anniversary of the airport incident approached, Marcus found himself reflecting on the profound changes in his life. He sat in the small park near their home, Apollo lounging in the grass beside him. As he penned an entry in the journal his therapist had encouraged him to keep. "A year ago, I was a man defined by my limitations. PTSD was not just a diagnosis, it was an identity I couldn't escape. Every day felt like a battle, and I was losing more often than not. Now, as I look back, I hardly recognize that version of myself. Don't get me wrong, the PTSD is still there. I still have nightmares, still have days when leaving the house feels impossible. But something fundamental has shifted. I'm no longer just surviving, I'm living with purpose. Through Unseen Allies, I've met so many incredible people. Veterans, yes, but also civilians with a wide range of invisible disabilities. Each of their stories has become a part of me, fueling my determination to keep pushing for change. I've learned that vulnerability can be a source of strength. Sharing my story, as terrifying as it was at first, has connected me to a community I never knew existed. It's shown me that I'm not alone in my struggles, and neither are countless others out there." Sarah. I don't have words to express what her unwavering support has meant to me. She's been my rock, my voice of reason, my partner in every sense of the word. Seeing her passion for this cause, watching her pour her heart into Unseen Allies, it's made me fall in love with her all over again. And Apollo, this amazing animal who's been by my side through it all. He's more than a service dog. He's a bridge between my past and my future. He reminds me every day that it's possible to be both strong and gentle, both a protector and in need of protection. I've had to confront my own biases and assumptions along the way. I've learned that advocacy isn't about having all the answers, but about being willing to listen, to learn, and to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult. There have been setbacks, of course. Days when the opposition feels too strong, when progress seems impossibly slow. But then I'll get a message from someone who stood up for their rights because of something they learned from Unseen Allies. Or I'll see a business proudly displaying the training certification we developed. And I remember why we're doing this. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined testifying before Congress or starting a nonprofit. I couldn't have pictured myself speaking in front of crowds or being interviewed on national news. The man I was then would have run from these challenges. The man I am now runs towards them, with Apollo by my side and Sarah cheering me on. I'm not cured. I don't think PTSD is something you cure, but I'm healing, growing, learning to live with my invisible wounds, rather than in spite of them. And in doing so, I hope I'm helping others do the same. A year ago, I was lost. Today I have direction, I have purpose, I have hope, and that, more than anything, is the most profound change of all. As Marcus closed his journal, he felt Apollo's head come to rest on his knee. He smiled, scratching behind the dog's ears. "What do you say, boy? Ready to change the world a little more today?" Apollo's tail thumped against the ground in response, and Marcus laughed. It was time to get back to work. As Marcus and Apollo made their way back home from the park, they passed by the local airport. Marcus paused for a moment, watching the planes take off and land. He remembered the fear and anxiety he once felt at the mere sight of an aircraft, and marveled at how different things were now. The airport, once a place of trauma, had become a symbol of transformation. It was where his journey of advocacy had begun, and now it stood as a reminder of how far he had come. As if on cue, a family exited the airport, a young girl with a service dog by her side. The girl's parents wore the look of weary travelers, but their faces lit up when they saw Marcus and Apollo. They approached, the mother's eyes brimming with tears of gratitude. "You're Marcus Johnson, aren't you?" she asked. "We saw your story. It's because of you that our daughter was able to fly with her service dog without any issues." "Thank you." Marcus knelt down to greet the girl's service dog, feeling a lump form in his throat. "I'm glad we could help," he said simply, the weight of the moment washing over him. As the family moved on, Marcus stood, his hand resting on Apollo's head. He looked back at the airport, then down at his faithful companion. "You know, Apollo," he said softly, "I used to think that coming home from war meant leaving the battlefield behind. But I've realized that some battles continue long after the war is over. The real victory isn't in avoiding the fight, but in choosing which battles are worth fighting." With that, Marcus and Apollo turned towards home, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, word spread quickly through the airport. As Marcus, with Apollo faithfully by his side, began to share his story, more and more people gathered to listen. He talked about his experiences in Afghanistan, the challenges of living with PTSD, and the life-changing impact Apollo had made. Sarah stood nearby, occasionally adding her perspective as a loved one supporting a veteran with PTSD. As Marcus spoke, something remarkable began to happen. Other veterans in the airport, some who had been silently struggling with their own invisible wounds, stepped forward to share their stories. A young woman with a seizure-alert dog joined the group, explaining how her service animal had given her the freedom to live independently. The impromptu gathering turned into a powerful educational moment. Airport staff, passengers, and even a few pilots on their way to flights stopped to listen and learn. People asked questions, gaining a deeper understanding of the challenges faced by those with invisible disabilities and the crucial role that service animals play in their lives. However, Marcus's decision was not without its challenges. His anxiety, already heightened from the earlier confrontation, threatened to overwhelm him at times as he spoke to the growing crowd. There were moments when he had to pause, relying on Apollo's calming presence and Sarah's steady support to ground himself before continuing. Additionally, Marcus and Sarah missed their original flight to San Diego. While the airline was more than willing to rebook them, it meant rearranging their carefully planned vacation itinerary. Yet, as the hours passed and the impact of their impromptu awareness session became clear, both Marcus and Sarah felt that the sacrifice was worth it. By the end of the day, Marcus was exhausted but filled with a sense of accomplishment he hadn't felt since his days in the Marines. He had turned a traumatic experience into an opportunity for education and change. The airline, spurred by the positive response to Marcus's session, announced plans to partner with veteran organizations to create comprehensive training programs and policies for accommodating service animals. As Marcus, Sarah, and Apollo finally boarded their rescheduled flight, upgraded to first class, as Mr. Daniels had promised, they knew that their vacation had taken on a new meaning. What had started as a personal challenge for Marcus to overcome his fear of flying had become the catalyst for a much larger movement of awareness and acceptance. Little did Marcus know that this was just the beginning of a journey that would take him far beyond the confines of that airport terminal, challenging him to become a voice for those who had long been silenced or overlooked.